Hello and welcome again. In this lesson, I'll be showing you how to use JSON Web Tokens in your application, how to sign a JWT, and how to decode it. So first of all, let me walk you through how the authentication process is expected to run. So usually, a user sends login credentials, for example, an email and password combination or username and password. And what that does is to um, ask the server, do you know who I am? Uh, so the server checks in with the authentication server. Uh, if there is a user with that username or a user who has those login credentials correctly, and if it finds that user, it creates a token from the user's details and sends back to the user, which is a way of saying, yes, I recognize you. You sent in the correct login details. Use this token when making your API requests. So when the user gets that token, and by user here, I mean the client, which is probably your browser or an API testing platform or another application. So what is going to happen is that the user passes the JWT when making other API calls. So, for example, if I log into Facebook and I enter my username and password and my login was successful, you would realize that the next step, Facebook does not need to ask me to log in again. I can now access my own profile, and by no way will I be able to access someone else's profile without logging in with their own login details. So Facebook will always recognize that I am the one making the API request because there is some information that is being passed between the browser and Facebook to let Facebook know who is making the API request, and Facebook in turn determines what to send back based on who is making the API request. Okay, so let's try to experiment with that a little. I'm going to do this in um, a single index.js file here. So I have this folder here, JWT demo, and I'm going to be writing some code in this folder. So I'm going to head over to my terminal where I have this directory opened, and I'm just going to run npm init. So in this lesson, we'll be using an npm package called JSON Web Token, which we'll be using to create JWT and also decode JWT. Okay, so while this is still loading up, I'm going to head back to VS Code and create a new file called index.js. And while we're waiting for npm to respond, I'm just going to set up my Express application. Const app equals, oh, sorry, const express equals require express, and then const app equals express. I'm going to save this and um, head back here so I can install. All right, so let's install express and the second package called JSON Web Token. Okay, so while this is running, let's complete our express app setup. So const port equals 5000, and then let's run app.listen ports, and then the callback function. I can just write it like this: console.log app started. Okay, I missed the parenthesis. Okay, so I'm going to save this. And so what we're going to do is create two routes. So the first route will create a token and send back to clients. And the second route will receive a token from clients and decode it. So these are the two things you would usually do with JWT in your application. You would create a token using a payload, and then you would also at some point receive a token and decode it to know who is using that token. All right, so let's start with, I think my installation is complete. Yes. All right, so let's just start our server to be sure everything is fine. Index.js, and let's see. And that should take about some seconds. Okay, so app is started. All right, so let's go back here um, and try to do this. So let's set up our Express app for post request. So app.use express.json, and that will be all. All right, so let's create a route app.post slash. Let's make this route create token, and then have our callback request response, and let's just console.log request.body here. So I'm going to save this and I'm going to restart my server. Okay, this time let's use the no daemon package. I have it globally installed here, so I do not need to install it again. So I don't have to restart my server all the time. So let me just run no daemon, and then it's going to pick my index.js file and restart it each time I save. All right, so let's just wait for it to start the server. Okay, let me head back to VS Code and create the second route, which we'll be using. So this would be a get request. And now we want it to do is decode token. And let's also give it request response and just leave it empty for now. Okay, so this is started and it's restarting because I've saved my index.js file again. And some seconds. Okay, so that's done. Now let me head over to Postman to send a post request to our route here. So post request to local hosts 5000 slash create token, and in our body here we want to use a raw object JSON specifically, and let's just send a pair of username Mike Fury, um, ID is 203, And okay, it's an error here. And password is secure password. All right, so let's send this request. And if I go to my terminal here, you can see the request body, username, ID, and password as expected, right? Okay, so let's try to create a token from this information. So I'm going to require the JSON web token package. So const JWT equals require JSON web token. And to create a token, you need a payload and you need a secret. And you also need expiry time. So the payload refers to an object that contains information which you are encoding. So this information is what you're sending as a JWT. So for example, I could pick the user's username and ID and sign this object as a token. So each time the token is decoded, the response, or rather the result will be this object that contains the username and the ID. So I'm just going to demonstrate that in a bit. The second part is the secret. The secret is just something like a password, or rather a string, which is used to encode the object. So it's usually best for you to use something that would not be publicly known, the same way you would keep your password secure. The third part is the expiry time, which represents how long that token is going to be valid. So you can set a number of seconds. It could be an equivalent of 24 hours or 1 hour, or as long as you want the user to be able to make API requests with that token without having to re-authenticate themselves. So enough gibberish. Let's just get on with it. All right. So pick. Let's create a payload. So const payload equals an object, and we want it to be username is request.body, just username, and then ID is request.body.id. All right, so we have this payload. Now to sign the JWT, okay, let's have the second part, which is secrets. Const secret equals, so that's just going to be a string. Let's just say super duper big secret. You can see I'm alternating the case just to make it more unpredictable. Because if an attacker has your secret, someone would with malicious intent could retrieve some uh, could intercept JWT that is being sent to your API server and decode it. And if for any reason you have sensitive information, it could be exploited. So you want to make it as unpredictable as possible. Subsequently, I'm going to show you how to not add them directly to your code like this, But for now, let's just use it this way and um, explore with this. All right. So the third part is the expiry time. So let's just say expiry equals, let's just say 36,000 seconds. So this is just in seconds. All right. So to create our token, we say JWT.sign, and the first argument will be the payload, which is which could be an object or a string or a buffer. So this time we're using an object, which is this payload variable here. So I'm just going to say JWT.sign payload. The second argument is the secret or private key. So this time we're using this variable called secret, which represents this string here. So I'm going to say secrets. And the third variable, or rather the third argument, would be an object that contains options. And in that object, I can specify the expiry time using expires in. And then this will take the time in seconds, so which is expire, which we have declared right here. So this will take a callback function and error token. So if there's an error, if there's an error, we want it to return res.json and just send back the error. And let's make that status 500. Else, let's just ask it to send back the token. So let's make that status 200 this time. All right, so let me save this and head back to my Postman right after this server starts up. Okay, this is taking a little longer than I expected. Should be done in some seconds. Okay, so this is done. So let's head back to Postman here and try to create a token. So I send this request and expecting a response. Okay, so now you can see the token is this long string of gibberish, if you would say, with three parts, as you would have observed: the header, the token, and then the payload. So this token is now what the user will send in every request to authenticate the user or the client. All right, so let's send another string combination here. Let's change the username to Paul Pogba, and let his password be unsecure, or just some gibberish. And let's send this. And you see that the string this time is different, but the process is the same. Okay, so this is what happens. Now, I would want you to take notes when signing your JWT. You would notice I used just the username and ID, and I did not include the password, which was deliberate. Do not, for any reason, add sensitive information in the payload that will be signed as JWT. The reason is because your JWT token can be intercepted by an attacker. It can be intercepted by virtually anybody that knows how to um, check a browser console if you're sending it through a browser. However, you do not want sensitive information like your user's password or maybe payment information or something to get into the wrong hands. So, as much information as you feel is not harmful, that is what is recommended that you sign in your JWT. So, for example, I will not add password to this object. All right, so I will just leave it as username and ID, which are just generic information that are not likely to be exploited by anyone. All right, so this explains how to sign the token. All right, so the next one will be how to decode the token. So to send back the token to the API, the token is usually sent in the request headers. So let me copy this and show you where it's usually sent. Right here on Postman, you'd see these three bars here: params, authorization, headers. So you can send it through any of these two bars, authorization or headers. Let me use headers for now. So what you would send would be authorization, and then here you would send it as bearer space, then the token. This is the usual conventional practice on how to send JWT to an API. Bearer, which tells the API that the owner of this token, or rather the person who is trying to access this API, is this bearer here, which represents this token here. So let's see how to decode this token and how to use it. So let me head back to VS Code and just console.log requests.headers. So you see what we're going to receive from the client. So let me send the get request to the code token. And if you check the console, you can see this object. Content type is application slash JSON. And this is because we are using express.json here. That is why we have this header here. Content type is application slash JSON. Then you can see authorization, which we just sent, and the string bearer with the token, user agents, and some other header contents, which we do not really need for now. So what we're concerned about with is the authorization key and the request headers. So we're going to pick the authorization header. So pick authorization header, extract token, and then we're going to decode the token. So let's start from picking the authorization header. So let's just say const header, or rather auth header equals requests.headers dot authorization. And let's log this string so we see what it looks like. Console.log um, auth header. Let me save this. My server is restarting, and this will be done in some seconds. Okay, so let's send this request again. Let's check the console and see what was logged. Now you can see I have just a string I sent, the bearer and the token. All right, so now let's pick the token from this string. Of course, you might ask, why do I need to add bearer? It's just conventional practice for you to send it as bearer with the token so that you know that you're um, receiving the token in the right format, and then you are also handling it in the right format. So let's head back to VS Code, and to extract the token, we have the string in this format, bearer and token. But what we need is just the token part. We're not interested in this bearer string here. So what we'll do is to use some string manipulation methods to um, separate the bearer from the token string. So what we would do is say const splitted string. So I'm going to use an a string method called split. So that will separate. It will split up the contents of the string into an array. So const splitted string equals auth header dot split, and we want the splitter to be the space. So it's going to um, pick everywhere there's a space, and anywhere it sees a space, it breaks off the string and inserts it as a new element of an array. So let's log this to the console and let's see what we're talking about. Console.log splitted string. I'm going to save this and head back to Postman, but let's be sure the server is started up first. Just some seconds. All right, so let's send this request again. Okay, so when I go back to VS Code, now you can see I have an array that has two elements. Number one is the bearer, and number two is the token. All right, so that is how the split uh, method works. So this is an array, and you will notice that the token is the second element in the array. So what we want to do is say const token equals splitted string at the index 1, and then we can now use the JWT method to decode this token. So we're going to say JWT dot verify, and this is going to take in three arguments. The first one is the token, which we are trying to decode, and in this case, that is token here. So token, then a secret or public key, which is the same thing we used here to sign it. So to make this more usable, I'm going to just place it outside here where it can be used globally. Then I'm just going to say token, then secrets, and then um, I don't think I have any options to do here. So I'm just going to do a callback. Um, Error or token. Okay. Let's call this decoded token, and let's check if there's an error. Um, let's return rest.json error. Let's make this status 500.json. Else, let's just send back the decoded token, and let's just say user is the decoded token. Let's send the status 200 here. Dot .json. So I'm going to save this and allow my server to restart, and that should take some seconds again. All right. So now let's send this request one more time, and now we have the same object which was signed. You can see the username and ID was sent back to us. All right. So this is how JSON Web Token works. You sign a token, you sign a payload rather, and that generates a token which you send to the client. And when the client is making a request to your server, the client has to send this token in the headers. Let's add one more part to this. So if there is no header, let's send back an error to the client. So let's say if no request.headers dot authorization, return res dot status 403, which is unauthorized, and just say message authentication token is required. Okay, so let's save this and try to send this request without a token now. Let's be sure our server has started up. And okay, all right, so now let's send this without this authorization header. And now you can see it sends back this error. So this is what will happen if the user is not signed in and tries to access um, an authenticated route. So I hope you've been able to understand how the JSON Web Token works, and I would see you in another lesson.